Oh boy, folks, do we have a doozy for you. Today we're going to take some footage and, well, we're going to dehance it using the Dehancer plugin. Now, in transparency, they reached out to us and asked if we would do a video using their plugin in exchange for the plugin itself. Dr. Beard Fosse and I said yes immediately because it seems like a pretty cool plugin. So while they did provide it to us, this review is going to be 100% honest, and we're going to look at a variety of footage, everything from the Sony FX6 to a Raptor Vista XL and a Blackmagic Ursa G2. Here we go. Okay, before the break I mentioned that we're looking at some footage from a variety of cameras, and we're going to see if we can take more clinical looking footage and make it look less clinical. And this whole video overall is just an evaluation of the Dehancer plugin suite. If you're not familiar with Dehancer, it's basically a film emulation suite that has a ton of different feature sets, including printing. And if you know anything about printing, that's a very complex process. That's the back half of when you shoot a negative, if you really get into printing. In fact, Dr. Beard Fosse actually has a degree in printing. His degree is in fine arts, but is a focus in printing because back in the day, film printing was such an important way to convey the artwork onto a specific medium. Anyway, Dehancer has a lot of plugin the Dehancer plugin has a ton of capabilities, lots and lots of feature sets inside of it, lots and lots of grain. It is very, very customized. We'll talk more about the plugin as a review element in the back half of this video, where Dr. Beard Fosse will join me. We'll just patch in a little live stream element, but that is what we're going to do. So we're going to take some footage, again, as I mentioned, from a variety of cameras and see what we can do with them. So the first thing I'd like to start with is some Sony FX6 footage. This was taken from a recent lens test. And so what we want to see is if we took Zeiss CP2s, the lenses that most people say are the most clinical lenses, certainly in the test that we had, if we were to take those Zeiss CP2s, what happens if we dehance it? Let's just see.
Relax, Jack. You don't need to draw any more attention.
Who are you? How did you find me?
Finding you isn't the hard part. Keeping them off your trail is.
So you've been looking for me too? What do you want?
Here to keep you alive. For now.
I don't know who you are, but I'm done trusting strangers.
You don't have much of a choice. Let's just say we have common enemies. So finish your drink and slip out through the kitchen.
If this is a setup, I'll make sure you regret it.
I'm counting on it.
So I did the grading on that. So again, not perfect. In fact, later on, we'll talk about some grades where I did the grade and then Dr. Beard Fosse did the grade. The difference being, as a creative director, I'm responsible for the overall look. So sometimes I do go in there and play with things to kind of help me understand what's capable. Dehancer is a perfect example of that. I may go add a bunch of add the Dehancer effect to some of our videos to see if it enhances it. In fact, I did that with a certain client and they loved it. They, in fact, liked it. They kept asking for grittier, so we gave it to them. We shot digital. They wanted it to look like film. Rare client, very special client. Sound like Donald Trump talking that way, but it is legitimately a great, great, great deal that they gave to us. So this footage, look, the reality of it is, to me, when I plopped the Dehancer stuff on, I graded everything and I put the Dehancer on, the way the footage looked, it really softened it up. It actually, I'm not gonna say it felt like film, but it didn't feel as sharp and as clinical and as clean and basic as a lot of digital footage looks to me. I grew up preferring film, so I enjoyed that process, and I think it looked pretty solid. Yeah, I mean, it added character, I guess you could say, and it definitely felt like inside the scene, it changed the skin tones up, roughened them up a little bit. Again, this grade is not perfect. This grade was not done by a professional colorist. This grade was done by an average colorist, someone who probably only touches, you know, maybe 10 hours a month of footage. But I think it's solid enough that if I were trying to tell a story with it, or if I was really trying to evaluate this plugin, this would tell me something very important. And that is, yes, this works really well. Yes, you have to be careful. And yes, you need to understand what you're doing. But that shouldn't shy you away from it, because it was very easy. There's a lot of tutorials out there. There's a lot of other people's videos that walk you through the whole process. I will say inside of DaVinci, it was a simple situation. I know some of these terms because I'm old. I grew up with film, so a lot of these terms make sense to me. If you don't know them, I would understand how that could be a little bit frustrating. Also, pro tip on the client I mentioned who loved the film grain look, once you apply a global, so maybe you apply a global to a finished video, which is very easy to do inside DaVinci, but once you apply a global, you may also want to add a global sharpening just a little bit. I did notice that when the grain hits, it does soften the image, which is good in some ways, but it may take it too far, and you may want to keep the grain. So what I found was one of the formulas that we were playing with is the mix of dehancer effect and a little bit of sharpening, just a light bit of sharpening that makes a difference on that side of it. Okay. That's that side of the plugin. That's just the overview type of things. And I could have just finished the video here. That's all that Dehancer really asked for, is just kind of get an overview. But that's not how we do product reviews. That's not how we do content reviews, or any kind of, if we're going to talk to you guys about something, we want to put it to a practical test. So then we took the footage and we put it to much more of a quote practical test, as I said, and we wanted to see what it could do. And here's how we broke it down. So we have some footage of Clavius, SP3, Summicron, and FX6. This is footage from our lens test. It was all shot in this room. You're going to see some crazy artifacting on it. You're going to see some absolutely weird things, but we had a lot of fun, especially when we get to the skip bleach side of things. Jeff really started working with real film processing techniques that he understands, because again, Dehancer was written really as a film processor. So Jeff understood a ton of the language and a ton of the technique more than I did, or his intuitive competence was much greater. And so we did have fun with that. So let's take a look at some of that footage. So, of course, as I mentioned, we were excited to see Dehancer, and when they reached out, cool, great, we love it. We always love when anybody reaches out and gives us a chance to show off their product or evaluate their product is what I should say. And if it's great, we get to give this nice, awesome review. But what really got me excited is when I started digging through the insane amount of film stocks. They had Ilford, and the reason Ilford's important is Ilford is a film stock that when Jeff and I were growing up and we lived together, we would shoot film, we would go shoot stills and do all kinds of miscellaneous things with our cameras. That sounded not right. But we would shoot a lot of Ilford, and Ilford is a black and white stock. And so what got us really excited was the fact that we've been working on these projects. You guys may have seen them on our channel or in other aspects of our social media. We've been working on these projects for the University of Southern Mississippi, where we take color footage, we turn it black and white, and then we only color key back in gold. So we got very excited about what happens if we take this footage, use Ilford for the black and white on this series. We're in season 2 of those vignettes. If we use it on season 2 of these vignettes, what happens when we change it that way? What kind of texture and beauty does it add? We also shot all of this on the from the lens test, basically. We shot all of these on the Clavius, and we specifically paired the Clavius with the G2, the Ursa G2, because of the way it looks. When you see this combination, it is outstanding. Again, nice glass, beautiful sensor, and Dehancer, that is a match made in heaven. Take a look. Now, the last thing I mentioned was that we wanted to show some red Raptor VistaVision XL. That was the body. It's all the same sensor. But we did shoot some recent stuff on that for our client Airbus for a TV commercial that is probably going on air, right about now. So I wanted to see, because the one thing I loved about that Red Raptor sensor is how beautiful the images are. They're very 3D. They have their own look. I will give Red all the credit in the world for the Raptor sensor. I feel like it has a very specific look. I thought the Dragon did too. Some of the sensors in between, not so much. But the Dragon had one that was a little grainier and felt filmic, if you will. And then the Raptor's the opposite. It's very clean, but it's almost 3D. It's so sharp and clean, it's 3D. So what I decided to do was take this and say, okay, I have some gorgeous footage. What happens if I just add a global to it? So what we're gonna show you is a string out of B-roll that's been approved, that's in the TV commercial, so we're no licensing issues. But I'm going to add just a pinch of Dehancer, just an overall effect to it, and I'm just gonna add it overall. So this is not a clip per clip situation, this will be a global. But I think it's really fascinating to see what it does to the image, really changes the vibe of it. And frankly, I mean, I like it, but I don't like it. And what I mean is I like it because I like seeing this stuff feel more filmic. What I don't like is I really like the Red Raptor sensor a lot. And I love it clean, and I think it's a very interesting look, and I'm very happy with that look. By the way, the glass on these is just CP2s. On that Red Raptor, I mean, again, clinical or not, it is a great looking image for sharpness and detail quality. So I like both worlds, and in this case we're going to go with what you see here. All right, so this section, I'm gonna cut into it, right? Because that's how we do things. So this is Jeff and I, we're just having a conversation. We are going to basically have dialogue about working with Dehancer, his opinion, his background, what he liked about it. I'll give you my same thing. I've given you tidbits throughout this video, but we'll have a little bit more inside of it. So as I mentioned, Jeff and I, Dr. Beard Fosse, joining us back again, always a proud, happy to have him in the mix. So the thing about the Dehancer thing, as I mentioned, is that they reached out to us. We've talked about that. So this is a quote sponsored video because they did supply us with an evaluation copy of Dehancer to test. We were able to use it, again, as I mentioned and shown, we used it not just in some testing, which we'll go over, but we also used it in a couple of projects and found them to be enhanced. The project itself was enhanced by it. We certainly did some other interesting things too. And so today what we're going to do on this portion of the video is we're just going to talk through it. Just, you have a professional colorist in Dr. Beard Fosse, and then you have me, who's not a professional colorist. I am a creative director, so my job is to make sure that Jeff does his job correctly. It's basically, it's what it comes down to.
I guess that's kind of correct for sure.
Yeah, it works. So let's talk about the overall impressions. I mentioned this earlier on, is that you actually have a degree in printing, photography, but with a focus in printing. And what got me excited is when they sent over the evaluation, before I even sent it to you, I started digging through it and I noticed there was a lot of printing options. Obviously the film stock side of things, we'll talk about that in a bit, but there's a lot of printing options, a lot of things that most people who have not worked in film probably, and I don't mean the film industry, I'm talking about actual, the medium of taking photographs and developing film, have probably not had a lot of experience. What was your take on it when you saw those print options? What was that like for you?
It made me excited. It's definitely it's another way of making your print enhanced, like our final picture. It's basically taken from a film stock, correcting it, and then making it onto another film stock, really. And yeah, and we've used it now. That specific part of the process from Dehancer we've used once already in a product. Yep. And it turned out super, super nice. And it was, It was an exciting moment. I'm trying to go through the effects here, Mike, on the page right now, because Film Developer made me more. All of them made me super excited. The print really does, because you have Cinelog film, Fuji 3513 print film, and then Kodak 2383 print film, and then Kodak Endura glossy paper, which is more towards my side of what my degree was in, because that's an actual paper print instead of a film print.
So could you explain to people that may not understand, because I think nowadays digital technology is lost. We have print on demand. Could you just overview of what that means? Like, your degree is in printing, but what does that actually mean at the end of the day? And how does it affect the final output?
It's basically doing color grading, really, or in black and white contrast grading, as I would say, probably the best term for it. It's basically, you can go through and you can do you can change your exposures, you can change your contrast, and you can change your density to the color that's in it. It's basically if you're in DaVinci Resolve, it's the color density is color boost for the most part.
Right.
Saturation, total density is that's density, contrast, and then exposure is exposure. You can target your different white balance point for it also, which is kind of cool. It just gives you more control to tweak the back end of your print. Going into actual printing, it's you make your negative, and then when you print something, you actually force in your own dodge and burn, which is old way of doing mask now, and changing your white balances, and then all your densities, your exposures. Hold on, sorry, I just lost my train of thought in the middle.
No, but I guess the question I'm asking is the delivery medium, the print medium you choose on the output is going to will change the effect in which the photo is going to have on someone who sees it, subjectively speaking, of course.
Yes, 100% will.
Right.
It definitely is. It becomes your, I guess, dealer's choice, as a way of saying it. It's your the person making it has complete control over the end product, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it goes back to something I've talked about before. I've used this quote before, and I'm paraphrasing the shite out of it, but it goes back to that whole Susan Sontag thing, is to take a photograph is to limit someone's perspective. And I argue that as filmmakers, cinematographers, storytellers, our job is to try to give the best representation of our perspective as possible so that they can experience it how we want them to experience it, although they're still going to take their own individual measures. This gets in some really heady
100%.
Theory.
It does.
But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, the ultimate end product of what you're doing is what you want to go out.
Right.
And then it's up to if you did your, this is definitely a deep conversation, because I would say from the fine art standpoint, if people don't understand it the way that you have it, then that's their own prerogative and their own subjectiveness to this thing. But in the commercial world, I would say, honestly, we're trying to force people to have a certain perspective and a certain viewpoint. So I can almost say, if you don't do it that way and they have a subjectively different view than you do, then you probably didn't do a great job of what you were supposed to do.
There you go. I mean, and that's theory. That's a whole separate podcast. Yeah. Maybe one day we'll continue that dialogue. So let's go over I'm going to go over some of the beat points of questions we have, and we can kind of go back and forth. What was your experience like overall working with Dehancer? What was your relationship like from a professional level of color? What was the learning curve? All those kind of things. What was it like working with Dehancer overall?
So, learning curve wise, there's a lot of things in Dehancer. A lot of things. You can you can start your inputs and do color transforms through this. You can do film profiles, film developers, film compression, expand. There's a lot of things here that I thought was going to make it super, super complicated to have to deal with, and it's actually very, very simple to me. There's also, from a non-professional, even from a professional standpoint, you can just plug it in and play with different things and you can see it in real time, like what's happening, which is, an easy way to be able to help figure out certain things, especially if you don't know what some of these things mean.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from my standpoint, just getting into it, I just played with it and started finding the looks. And I knew a little bit about film stocks because, again, Jeff and I Dr. Beardfosse and I are a little bit older than some of our audience. But being able to go through it and look at the film stocks and say, oh, man, I love Ilford. And I was super stoked about Ilford and excited to see. Ilford's a black and white stock, by the way. But even processing that footage and running it through Ilford, I still had to make tweaks and do other stuff. But it was, to me, it was intuitive enough that I may not know what all those words and sections may mean in terms of technical super pixel PP type stuff, but I knew that the effect I could get by altering certain ones. And after about, I don't know, I spent about an hour with the project, just with a project and using Dehancer on it. And I went clip by clip. And after I went through it, I was like, oh, I get it now. And so to me, I felt like the UI is pretty straightforward and pretty user-friendly.
It's very, very straightforward and user-friendly. There's certain things that don't necessarily think I would use very often in it.
Right.
But there's definitely needs for them, like film breath and gate weave and overscan. For what we do, they seem a little gimmicky. But I can see those uses for those things in multiple different projects.
No, for sure. I feel like some of that stuff would be really good social media output pieces, or
very much.
Or if you're trying to make footage look like a flashback, I could argue for
Yes.
several projects we've done, if we could actually utilize that. I think it would be really interesting and very smart to potentially use some of those techniques when we're showing stills. So if you're showing a still and maybe you've got a slow digital zoom, but you add this effect to it, so it just reminds the audience that it is a still, that it's a separate piece of content. I could argue for that. But I couldn't
100%.
see doing a whole project with some of it.
No, my biggest one that I can think of, because I think we've done a breakdown on this channel a long time ago of it, is Love Mom.
Yep.
When we did that, there's some flashbacks in that would be perfect for that kind of work. Also, like the I think it's the weave was the one that we used to do lockdown shots, and then we would film wall charts with handheld cameras, and then take the tracking from that, put it onto the lockdown shots to make handheld shots. And you can do that inside of Dehancer now, which, doesn't seem like a big thing anymore, because when we were doing it, I mean, it was, 10, 12 years ago that we were doing that product, or that process. I think there's other programs that do it just as easily now, too. I don't want to discredit or credit them for doing something that I think is already out there. But it definitely, to put it into a singularized product, where you can do multiple things at one time, is what makes it kind of exciting for me. It's one plugin instead of multiple plugins you put on your timeline, and then more data, more graphic processing, more of that type of stuff, and then slow down your computers the more effects you put on things.
100%. So how do you feel about how it affected our systems? Because, one of the things that's not often talked about well, sometimes it is, but a lot of times a plugin or another item is sent to us and it's tested. We've talked about this with cameras before. We obviously, earlier in the video, we showed some red VistaVision XL. The XL doesn't really matter, but VistaVision footage, which is 8K, and it bogs down our system. It's beefy. It doesn't bog it down, but it is aggressively using resources. And certainly when I ran the tests of dehancing that gorgeous red footage, there were some challenges in that. But what is your takeaway on that side of things of how did you feel like it affected your system from your side of it? Because you're working off a laptop. I'm working off of a massive edit bay provided by Puget Systems. What's your take?
It works very well on my system. I also have a very beefy laptop that I'm using. But it is an older laptop now. The main thing that gives my system problems still is the old GH5, all I system. That to me is if a computer can run that codec, then it kind of works on everything else still. Red footage works fine on my system, which is kind of nice. Dehancer does bog down a little bit in terms of my speed just because the way I've been using it is I do my node tree and then I use it at the end to help enhance what I've been doing. I've also played around with doing it at the very beginning of the setup. And when I do that, I'm creating the whole entire look specifically off of Dehancer. And it's also a great starting point of an idea, though, by doing it that way. The end product is usually I'll start my process and then I'll jump to the very end with the Dehancer, put it on, and then figure out what print type that I want. Like when we did VistaVision stuff, and then I go correct in front of it to help keep the look that I have from Dehancer, but just to enhance it.
Yeah.
And it's a very quick system to deal with.
Yeah, I noticed on my side the biggest challenge I had, like yours, even with the beefier machine, and it's beefy, was playback speed. It seemed to chug a little bit when I was, not all clips, but some clips, depending on what it was. But another aspect that we found that was very useful for this is we graded a project. We had a client, I just showed it, it was Dehancer. I showed it earlier in the video. Yeah. But that particular client, that video, we applied the effects as a instead of just going per clip, we applied it as a global on the back end.
Yeah.
And that made it a much better process of just, and again, we sent it to client, got approval, and said, hey, look, we've added some grain and some other effects, and they loved it. That was one of the clients that they preferred the dehanced version to the original version. That footage was all shot mostly on FX6 or FX3. So even then, they liked seeing a little bit more grit, to her words, not mine, but she liked the grittier part of it. But it was nice to be able to just apply it as a global and charge ahead without overtaxing the system.
Yeah, especially for clients that are like that, where it's, make it grittier, or, when it's like an overall global kind of thing, it does make it super easy. Just throw it right there and be done with it. Especially with all the options that Dehancer has. I mean, you have all the way, I think it was 8mm, which for the most part, to me, is unusable for what we're doing again.
Right.
That's a little too intense of grit, I think, for most of our clients. But yeah, like 16mm all the way 65mm, which, it's a much more fine, refined type of grain look to it. So, I mean, it does make that super easy. And then using that one global look, we already had a completely, I'm going to call it our commercialized look that we do for a lot of stuff, where it's slightly warm, good contrast, good saturation. But it just adds another look to it in a matter of seconds. Yeah, it was definitely worth even exploring. We showed some of I showed the USM footage obviously earlier, and you see this black and gold look, and that was a multi-step process, because obviously it's graded. You grade it, you do the gold look, apply, and then you were adding in, I forget which film stock we liked them. I think it was Olga, something with an O. No, we're on the Ilford HP5.
Ilford. Sorry,
is what we're doing on this one. Actually, no, the one that you're showing, it's the small multi-clip that I did, right?
Yep.
Okay, that's actually Rolly Ortho film, which is a film that only processes blue and gold, or blue and green through it. So the red doesn't get processed through, and it becomes a higher contrast in it. That was a fun. What we're working on now, the same project, the actual project, we're doing HP5, but it's a layer system where I'm selectively coloring first, highlighting that matte, making mattes of all the gold spots, and then the next layer behind that is turning it black and white with Dehancer, and doing it's multiple layers in a layer, like in the layer mode of nodes. I'm looking at one shot right now. It's 4 layers in the thing. So I mean, it's in terms of Dehancer in that type of process, it's definitely a beefy process to deal with, like machine wise, but it still works very well. And putting it in a layer was something I wanted to make sure would work as well. It's we usually work in mostly parallel nodes, but we do a lot of layer node stuff for small individual things like skin tones and stuff like that. But this process is very hard. Parallel nodes at the beginning, then layer nodes behind it, and it's a beefy node tree.
Yeah, I definitely would like, once we're done, and this is season 2 of those projects, but once we're done with all that, I think a nice big fat breakdown video might be interesting for those. If you guys want that, just make sure you throw it in the comments and tell us you want to see it. It'll be super technical because it's Jeff. It's all Jeff's brain. Jeff's brain is way more technical than my brain. But it is fascinating because the output that we get is shocking to your senses. It's shocking to your eyes, rather. And that's a good thing when you're trying to be disruptive in a space that has to not just reach a young demographic, it has to reach a current demographic. It also has to reach stakeholders that may be older alumni and everyone else. So the color treatment in that is very much part of the artistic process equal. It's kind of a pari passu scenario there. So let me ask you this. Looking on it now, would you say that it's worth the buy? Because Dehancer is about a $500 plugin. Would you say it's worth the buy if we had come across Dehancer without this notification towards us and this offer? Would you have pitched that up the old
chain of command?
Up the chain of command to the president, and which, just so you guys know, we don't just buy whatever we want. We have to pitch things to the president who has authority. But would you pitch this to me to then pitch to her? Or what would you do there in that side of things?
Well, funny you asked that way, because when you sent me the text that we had gotten the email, I told you that I had literally been thinking about it and trying to figure out a way to deal with it firsthand to see if I could experiment with it without having to buy it. And then you literally got that email, and I was like, well, that's kind of just the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
In terms of, is it worth it? To me, yes. It's trying to think of how many other programs I've bought, but behind it, it's equal to Neat Video for me. When Neat came out, there was no better noise reduction program on the planet to me. It was a process, because this is before it got integrated in DaVinci. Since then, though, Dehancer is the next closest thing I have to that, like a must-have. Like I'll use it on probably 90% of our projects, I think.
Right, and it's not always taking it to the most dehanced version.
No.
It's just even subtle stuff like we've learned.
It could be just one subtle piece to it, like adding halation from it, on a project, or even the bloom, or just it could be one little piece, or it could be the whole entire process of it. It's definitely it's worth it from my perspective.
One of the things that you did in one of these clips, I wanted to ask you about it, and then we'll wrap this section up. You did a skip bleach look, or a bleach bypass is the other side of that. That's an old film term, and I can tell you the first time I remember us having a conversation about this is when we went to go see, I believe it was Fight Club that also utilized bleach bypass.
Yes.
And I remember us seeing it and then talking about it because Fight Club has a very specific look. What does that concept mean, and then what does it do essentially? Because we can see it in the footage, but it's definitely a different look, and it definitely, to me, feels very cinematic. But I'm also from that era of 90s filmmaking where experimental printing and exposure was part of the process. What is that bleach bypass type scenario?
So really what it does is it's an old film process of how to develop it. It's where you skip or partially skip, depending on how much contrast you want to build out of it. You skip part of the bleaching process of the actual silver retention to the film itself. For me, bleach bypass is definitely, Fight Club is one of the best examples of it. I don't want to. I think Pi also was a bleach bypass product. I think
black and white bleach bypass.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen Pi, but I remember that contrast build. It's definitely it's a contrast that is super noticeable right away. It's usually in the highlights where it just like really gets contrasty. Your blacks get really black, and it's a process that takes a couple of steps if you're trying to do it in color. I did it with the ortho film and just pumping the contrast and playing with the color density to it. And it took me, 30, 40 seconds to get the look that I was like super interested in. And Dehancer made it super easy to do.
Yeah, I think it's a stylized look, which is what we've said. I don't think Dehancer is. Yeah, Dehancer is not the tool if you're looking for a quick LUT, bro. It is not that tool, in my opinion. But if you know enough about color and you're patient enough to learn about it, I think Dehancer is a wonderful, wonderful tool in your toolkit, certainly in your colorist toolkit, or even if you're just shooting stuff and you want to mix it up. Even if you're a wedding videographer, being able to use some of this to give those looks, give your wedding footage a different vibe, I think is really fascinating. For us, I think it's a great finishing product and it adds a level of density to it. So with that said, is there anything else you want to say about Dehancer before I just close out this bad boy?
I think what you said is perfect with it. It definitely is a finishing touches kind of product for me. But I also can go where if you know how to match shots in color, it really could be for like a wedding videographer or a small time production company, not a use all be all kind of LUT system, but you can make a quick look and be pretty good with it, and your clients will be pretty happy, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. All right, well, that's going to do it for this section. Here's me again.
Yes, I know it's a long video, but if you're really thinking about spending $400 to $500 on a plugin, I would want to know everything possible, or at least go to someone who's worked with it in a way that's used it. Now, I have now had 2 clients, since recording this video, 2 clients have now loved the Dehancer look, which allowed us to add production value and bring up that relationship with the client, which means when I go back, we gave them something they'd never seen before. That's why they hired us. They hire you for your brain and your ability, not just your skills. So in that case, what a great feature to have in our toolkit. Does it mean I need to use it all the time? No, but when I can pull it out and use it, it's a great feature set to have. That said, we also have an affiliate code. I will post that in the link below. So if you would like to buy this, there's an affiliate code. It helps us, it helps them, it helps you. Everybody wins. It's like a triangle of happiness. And again, the link is down below just for you to get that affiliate code. And again, I'm not peddling a product off onto you. Buy it if you want to. They have a free trial as well. Totally worth it in my opinion. Maybe a little more complex than some of you, but I think some of you may like rather, but I think you'll really enjoy it at the end of the day. Thanks again for watching. Just stick around for more. I'm out of here.